because the Sustainable Development Goals are so broad and cover people and planet across 17 buckets and cover 169 indicators, that was a very good starting point. And as we know, the Sustainable Development Goals were really designed for nations, not particularly well designed for corporations. Nonetheless, many corporations have committed to them. But when you then map what they can actually touch, it's around 25 of the 169 goals. And they fall into these 7 buckets: gender, good business, human rights, poverty, climate, waste, and water. We thought there were some things that were more urgent, right, and existential. So we have taken, in the planet, we've taken climate as an urgent existential issue and rated that slightly more than the other factors within the index. And we've also taken human rights and we've weighted that higher.
A lot of these companies are being driven by their investors to manage the risks that emerge in a world in which we're driving ever upwards in temperature. Most of us are really not just interested in risk, which we might be as people that hold these companies in our pension fund, but we're really interested in these companies' impact in the world in a way that it affects us in our real lives. So I think that's one of the gaps, actually, that's maybe worth thinking about in the future, is the gap between whether companies are just managing these risks as to their long-term financial performance, or really having an impact and being responsible for their impact on the wider world. It is, yes, very hard, and one of the reasons is that we live in a world in which companies have been able to just kind of tell their own story on this stuff, choose what's important to them or what they think people want to know, and that's not, unimportant, but over the next few years we need to develop standardized ways of looking at these.
So Global Compact, in collaboration with the Global Reporting Initiative, have produced guidance for business reporting on the SDGs as a practical guide, but they're loath to say you must use these indicators. So I think we're still quite a long ways from that. And as Alexandra said at the beginning, the official SDG indicators are those are for governments to report back on. So there's always going to be a challenge in translating that specifically to business, and I think some latitude in allowing business to choose how they report isn't necessarily a bad thing, but that leads us to the challenge that this index is seeking to address: comparability and being able to actually assess from one company to the other how they're performing.
And I would just say one thing, therefore, about the chart, because one sector which has been assiduous in engaging with the UN on this is the resource extraction sector. Both the big oil majors, for example, the former chairman of Shell and then chairman of Rio Tinto was for years chairman of the Global Compact, Mark Moody-Stewart. And, Rio Tinto is one which has always been very forthcoming in engaging. In fact, the mining sector as a whole has been. And I just wonder whether, under your weighting, Alexandra, it's possible for a resource extraction company to do well. Because, what I'm seeing as I look is a massive gap for that sector between talk and walk. And maybe it's really a gap between talk and the business they're in. And I think that's actually quite a methodological problem, because, I admire what these companies are trying to do in terms of building up a renewable portfolio, in some cases, shifting from mining and somehow. So I hope a little milk of human kindness and encouragement might be found for that, properly maligned sector, but nevertheless one which has been in the front line of picking up the SDGs and before that MDGs challenge.
There's a lot of talk about sustainability, the idea of stopping climate change, preventing climate change. But it seems to me that to an extent we're going to have to deal with climate change. We're going to have to deal with people who are climate refugees. We're going to have to find ways of stopping people from having their lives destroyed. I just wonder whether there's any room in this system to, I suppose, give credit to companies who find ways of alleviating that problem, who find ways of solving problems around displacement of people, food security, questions that are not so much around carbon emissions, but the mitigation of human suffering.
We need to transition
the global economy. We need to transition the global economy away from the things that we do now and towards a new way of doing things. And you can see, I mean, very recently, I think Labour outlined, or of course, let's not talk too much about Labour's plans in any way, but in their sustainability plan, you know, that the level of green jobs that can be created with the right amount of investment, you know, you can create jobs if you invest properly in renewable energy infrastructure in this country. And the same in Vietnam, for example. I was working with an organisation called Change.org, and they were lobbying the government heavily to start considering things like smart cities and renewable energy rather than coal capacity. So there are, within the transition, there is a way to make sure that you are providing better, more jobs for people.
I guess a point of sympathy for companies around this debate. So it's very easy to assume that everyone's aiming at the same goals.
Right.
But when you think about the SDGs and how broad some of these societal priorities are, some of them have nothing innately to do with a company's operations and ability to continue to efficiently operate in the future. Some of it is asking them to give up some of that profit or some of their resources to help solve their demands. Profit is really essential to companies' ability to contribute to the SDGs. Because if they're fighting either a short-term profit crisis or a long-term existential threat, they're not going to be able to devote resources. This is not going to be a priority at board level. And so I think there is, you know, a huge amount of synergy between sort of profit and purpose. You need healthy companies in order to do the things that we as society want them to do.